The story begins on a quiet morning in a courtroom, filled with an air of anticipation. The room is filled with people, but all eyes are focused on a small group seated near the front. Two white police officers, dressed in their uniforms, who have been involved in a long history of corruption. These officers have abused their power, using their badges to intimidate, manipulate, and break the law without any fear of consequences. The courtroom is busy with the usual hustle and bustle of a trial, but there's a subtle sense of unease among the audience, as everyone knows the outcome could have serious implications for the police force and the community they serve. The officers sit smugly, confident that their long-standing influence within the system will ensure that they get off scot-free. They've been through this before, caring little about the individuals they've wronged, and today is no different. Their arrogance is palpable. These two officers have always played by their own rules, finding ways to skirt accountability while maintaining the image of upstanding law enforcement officers. They have been involved in racial profiling, planting evidence, and abusing their power for personal gain. Their history of bending the law has made them feel invincible. But today, they are facing an unknown threat, a threat that, unbeknownst to them, will turn their lives upside down. The tension in the air is thick, but the officers remain relaxed, chatting amongst themselves, their smugness evident. Little do they know, the black man they've spent years trying to break down is about to change the entire course of the trial. The judge enters the room, and everyone stands, signaling the start of the trial. The officers look around the room, still with that same sense of confidence. Their demeanor remains unchanged, and they settle into their seats, their backs straight, as if they are ready for another easy victory. But then something unexpected happens. The doors open again, and a figure enters the courtroom. A black man, dressed in a sharp suit, walks in with quiet confidence. His steps are measured, his eyes focused, and there's something different about his presence in this room. It's as if he's walking into a space he's already claimed as his own. The officers don't think twice about the newcomer, at least, not at first. They dismiss him with a glance, assuming he's just another individual caught up in the system they control. After all, they've seen people like him come and go, always under their thumb. But as the figure walks forward, heading toward the defendant's table, something strange begins to happen. The black man doesn't sit down. He stands tall, with presence that demands attention. He's not just another defendant or lawyer in a courtroom. He's someone who has spent years building a case, waiting for the right moment to turn the tables on the corrupt officers who thought they were untouchable. The room grows quiet, and the officers glance at each other, confusion beginning to creep in. They can sense the change in the atmosphere, but can't quite place it. And then the truth hits them with the force of a freight train. The black man steps forward, and without saying a word, hands the court documents to the judge. The officer sitting smugly on the defendant's side begins to feel uneasy, his hands fidgeting in his lap. The judge looks at the papers and raises an eyebrow. For a moment, the entire room seems to hold its breath. And then the judge looks up from the papers, his gaze landing on the two officers who have caused so much pain and suffering for the community. With calm authority, the judge addresses the court. "Ladies and gentlemen, I believe we have a change in leadership here today. The man you see standing before you is not just any attorney. He is your new boss, the new police chief. The man you've wronged is here to ensure justice is served." The courtroom falls silent. The corrupt cops, once confident and smug, are frozen in place, unable to process the sudden shift in power. Their jaws drop, and their eyes widen in disbelief. How could this be? The very man they've tried to break, the one they've ignored and dismissed, is now in charge of the very system they once controlled. The shock is evident on the faces of the two corrupt officers. Their world, one they've manipulated for so long, is crumbling around them. The reality of the situation doesn't hit them immediately. It's almost as if their minds refuse to process it. For years, they've been in control, the ones who called the shots, and now, in a single moment, their power is slipping away. The officers exchange glances, their faces shifting from confident smugness to uncertainty. Their hands twitch, as if they want to reach for their badges, to remind themselves of who they once were. They look around the courtroom, hoping for some kind of validation, a sign that this is all just some mistake, but there's no comfort to be found. The judge remains calm, but his eyes are stern. The black man, standing with quiet dignity, is now their superior. For a brief moment, one of the officers even opens his mouth as if to protest, but no words come out. His throat feels tight, the weight of his guilt and arrogance suddenly overwhelming him. He's never been in this position before. An outsider, someone who's no longer above the law, but now underneath it. His entire career of abusing his badge, of making lives miserable for those who didn't have the power to fight back, feels like a distant, terrible dream. He wants to shake it off, to go back to being the officer he thought was untouchable, but deep down, he knows there's no going back now. The other officer, more reserved but equally shocked, slowly stands up, his mind racing as he tries to come to terms with the fact that the person they've harassed, belittled, and mistreated for years is now the one who holds the key to their future. The reality sinks in, and a cold sweat starts to form on his brow. His palms feel clammy, and his chest tightens. This man, this black man, is their boss. And it's no longer just about a court case. It's about their very careers, their livelihood, and the power they thought they held. It's all slipping through their fingers. The courtroom, which had been tense with anticipation, now buzzes with whispers as people start to comprehend what's happening. The prosecutor, who had been sitting in the background, now looks at the new police chief with admiration and respect. There's a sense of awe in the air, not just because of the dramatic turn of events, but because of the symbolism behind it all. This moment is not just about one man's rise to power. It's about justice being restored, about the balance being tilted in favor of the oppressed, and about the corruption within the system being exposed for all to see. The black man, now standing confidently at the head of the courtroom, gives the officers a long, steady look. His eyes are calm, but there's a fire burning within them. The pain of years of racial injustice, the years of being disregarded and silenced, has led him here. This isn't just a victory for him. It's a victory for everyone who has been wronged by the system they created. The officers, still in shock, realize that they are about to face the consequences of their actions, consequences they've never had to face before. The black man steps forward, his voice breaking the silence in the room, steady and unwavering. "You may have thought you could get away with your crimes, but today the truth comes to light," he says. His words are calm, but there's an undeniable strength in his tone. Today, the people you've hurt, the communities you've torn apart, have a voice. And it's mine. The officers try to protest, but the weight of the moment overwhelms them. Their voices crack, and their arguments fall flat. The man who they've tried to break down is now standing as the person who will hold them accountable for every wrong they've committed. The black man turns to the judge, who nods in approval. The judge recognizes the significance of this moment, as the former victims of systemic oppression now stand in positions of authority, turning the tide of justice in their favor. "Your Honor," the man says, "these officers have used their badges to commit countless abuses, and it is time for their reign to end. I am here not just to take control of this department, but to make sure that justice is not just an idea, but a reality." The officers, defeated and stripped of their once unassailable power, exchange helpless glances. They've been caught in their own web of corruption, and the truth is now out in the open for all to see. There is no escape for them. The courtroom is unnervingly still as the weight of the situation begins to sink in for the two officers. As the black man's words echo in their minds, they realize they have no leverage left. Their past, once cloaked in privilege and power, now feels like a distant memory. There's no use in holding on to the illusion of control. The table has turned, and they are the ones at the mercy of the law. For the first time in years, the officers feel like the powerless ones. Their careers were built on intimidation, threats, and a system that allowed them to get away with actions they knew were wrong. But this time it's different. The man standing before them is not just a victim of their past actions, he's their future. This new reality is a gut punch they never saw coming. One of the officers, still standing in the back, shifts nervously. His eyes dart to the black man at the front and then to the judge, who now looks at him with a discerning gaze. A sense of dread washes over him. His arrogance, the cocky attitude that had kept him at the top of the food chain, begins to disintegrate. He realizes that the very system that had been so kind to him is no longer protecting him. There are no more privileges, no more blind eyes turned. The other officer, more cynical and defensive, opens his mouth to speak, but his voice falters. His usual confidence, once built on years of being above reproach, now seems misplaced. The truth that he's long ignored is staring him in the face, and his attempts to fight back feel empty. He had always justified his actions, his cruelty, his manipulation, as being part of the system. But now that system is no longer on his side. The black man, now assuming the mantle of leadership, holds the power to dismantle everything he and his partner built. The prosecutor watches all of this unfold with quiet satisfaction. This trial is not just about prosecuting two corrupt cops. It's about sending a message that the abuse of power will no longer be tolerated, that the law is for everyone, not just those who can manipulate it to their advantage. There is a palpable sense of justice in the air, as if the room is holding its breath. Meanwhile, the black man, whose hands were once tied by the very system these officers helped maintain, stands tall, resolute. His demeanor is calm, but his eyes are burning with an intensity that cannot be ignored. He's not just taking control of a department. He's reclaiming the dignity of an entire community that these officers have trampled on for years. As he addresses the judge once again, his voice carries an air of authority, no longer a voice of protest but a voice of command. "This isn't just about getting my position," he says, looking over at the two officers who are now visibly shaking. "This is about making sure that no one else has to suffer under a corrupt system. We are all accountable now. You cannot use your badge as a shield any longer. I will make sure that justice isn't just served today, it will be served every day moving forward." The two officers, for the first time in their careers, find themselves staring at the harsh consequences of their actions. Their smirks have faded into hollow expressions as they realize the magnitude of what is happening. There is no hiding from the truth any longer. Their reign of terror has come to an end. The tension in the room builds as the judge nods in approval. The black man's words have struck a chord. The corruption these officers have fostered is being brought to light. They have no choice now but to face the consequences of their years of misconduct. In a moment of unexpected clarity, one of the officers speaks up, his voice shaking with fear. We were just doing our job," he stammers, but the words sound weak and inadequate. "We didn't mean to." "You didn't mean to?" The black man interrupts, his tone icy. "You didn't mean to ruin lives? You didn't mean to abuse your power? You didn't mean to destroy people's trust in the law? Your actions have consequences. You don't get to hide behind excuses anymore." The other officer, still silent, looks away, unable to meet the black man's eyes. He knows the truth. He can't deny it any longer. The black man turns to the judge and the prosecutor. "These officers must be held accountable for their actions. I'm not just asking for change. I'm demanding it. The system needs to be held to the highest standards, and the people in power need to be the ones who lead by example. This isn't about vengeance. It's about ensuring that we can trust the very people who are meant to protect us." The prosecutor nods in agreement, impressed by the strength and clarity of the black man's words. The judge looks down at his notes, making a final decision that will reverberate throughout the courtroom. The officer's fate is now sealed, and it's clear that their time has come. The black man, standing tall in the face of all the wrongs committed against him, knows that this victory is just the beginning. The fight for justice is ongoing, but today, the corrupt officers no longer hold the power. The balance has been restored, and the system that once oppressed has now given way to real change. As the courtroom begins to clear, there is a sense of quiet triumph in the air. The black man may have walked into this courtroom as just a victim of systemic corruption, but he leaves as a symbol of justice, empowerment, and the unwavering resolve to hold those in power accountable. The corrupt officers, once so confident in their ability to manipulate the system, are now left facing the truth they can no longer escape. In the days that follow the courtroom drama, the story of the two corrupt officers spreads like wildfire throughout the community. News outlets pick up the story, social media buzzes with heated discussions, and people from all walks of life begin to voice their opinions. There's a sense of disbelief, but also a sense of catharsis that finally, someone is standing up to the corrupt system that has allowed so many injustices to occur. For the black man, now officially the new boss of the police department, the community's response is overwhelming. He receives messages of support, gratitude, and encouragement from people who have long felt oppressed by the very system that was supposed to protect them. Former victims of police brutality and abuse come forward, sharing their stories, grateful that someone in power will now listen. It feels like the weight of years of injustice is starting to lift. But for the two officers, the fallout is swift and brutal. Their colleagues, once allies, now look at them with disdain. No one wants to be associated with corruption, especially not when it's been exposed so publicly. The officers, once confident in their unchallenged authority, now find themselves outcasts within their own department. They've lost the respect of their peers, and the trust of the community they swore to protect has been shattered beyond repair. Rumors circulate that one of the officers is quietly considering early retirement, while the other is battling with legal action and the potential of criminal charges for their actions. Neither of them can escape the public's judgment, and the harsh reality of their situation settles in. They had never imagined that their arrogance and disregard for others would lead to this total ruin, both professionally and personally. As the new black leader takes over the department, there's a noticeable shift in the way things are run. Training sessions are revamped, focusing on ethical behavior, community engagement, and holding officers accountable for their actions. The department, once feared and distrusted, begins to rebuild its reputation. Citizens who had previously kept their distance from law enforcement begin to feel a sense of hope that change is possible. Meanwhile, the officers, now facing multiple investigations and the very real possibility of being fired or even jailed, are forced to confront the truth about their actions. The public's backlash is intense, and both men begin to see the cracks in the system they once took advantage of. They are no longer the untouchable figures they once were. In the local news, the black man is hailed as a hero. His decisive actions, his unwillingness to back down, and his dedication to true justice make him an inspiration to many. He becomes a symbol of what can happen when power is given back to the people and the system is reformed from within. The community begins to rally around him, grateful for the changes he's made and optimistic about what lies ahead. However, the officer's former colleagues now have to reckon with their own complicity. Many wonder how they allowed such corruption to thrive within the department. There's a growing sense of shame among the officers who were too afraid or unwilling to speak out about the unethical behavior they witnessed. Slowly, but surely, the department starts to clean house. It's a painful process, but one that ultimately leads to a more just and transparent system. In private conversations, some officers express regret for not standing up sooner, and others quietly admit that they were part of the problem all along. They see now that the very power they held in their hands was never meant to be abused. The black man, through his rise to power, has forced them to reckon with their own shortcomings. He has not just changed the course of his own life, but the lives of countless others who have been wronged by the system. But the fallout isn't just confined to the department. The officers' personal lives begin to unravel as well. Their families, once proud of their careers, are now left to pick up the pieces of shattered reputations. The public shaming is relentless, and no corner of their world remains untouched. Friends who once admired them now turn their backs. Their once charmed lives are now marred by scandal, and the weight of their actions becomes a constant burden. Meanwhile, the black man finds himself in a position of both triumph and responsibility. While the community's response is overwhelmingly positive, he is fully aware that the real work is only just beginning. He cannot afford to rest on his laurels, not when the department's reputation is still in tatters and the public is watching closely. The challenge now is to rebuild trust with the community, trust with his fellow officers, and trust in the very system that had failed so many for so long. But despite the challenges ahead, the black man remains determined. His resolve to make real change within the department is unwavering. He knows that his journey is not just about securing his position. It's about ensuring that future generations of officers are held to the highest standards of integrity and ethics. No longer will law enforcement be a system where power is abused, where corruption runs unchecked. Now, there is a new vision, one that prioritizes justice, fairness, and accountability. As he moves forward, he continues to meet with community leaders, civil rights organizations, and former victims of police brutality. His message is clear. The work is far from over, but real change is possible. And while the corrupt officers who tried to manipulate the system are facing the consequences of their actions, he is just getting started with his mission to create a more just and equitable society for everyone. The officers may have rejoiced in their corrupt power for years, but their day of reckoning has come. The black man who was once their victim is now their boss, and the tables have turned in a way that no one could have predicted. The system that once protected them has now become their greatest enemy, and the black man's determination will continue to dismantle the walls of corruption, one stone at a time. With the corrupt officers out of the picture, the newly appointed black leader begins his tenure as the head of the police department. But despite the triumph of exposing the corruption and bringing about change, he finds himself navigating a difficult and complex landscape. The road ahead is not a simple one, and the pressure to perform and prove that this transformation is more than just a temporary shift weighs heavily on him. He steps into a department that has long been associated with racial prejudice, excessive force, and corruption. Trust, once broken, cannot be repaired overnight. The community has seen the worst of the department's actions for years, and now they are cautiously looking to see whether the new leadership will truly make a difference or if this is merely another facade. His every decision will be scrutinized, and there's no room for error. The first thing the new leader does is introduce sweeping reforms. He knows that to rebuild the department's credibility, he must establish clear guidelines that emphasize ethics, transparency, and accountability. He implements mandatory retraining programs on racial bias, ethical policing, de-escalation techniques, and building better relationships with the community. He makes it clear that any officer found to be engaging in unethical behavior will be held accountable, and he sets up systems to ensure that complaints from citizens are taken seriously. However, he quickly realizes that not all of the officers are on board with the changes. Some officers, particularly those who had been part of the corrupt system or had been too passive in their earlier years, are resistant to the new reforms. They're accustomed to a certain culture within the department, one of unquestioned authority and disregard for the community's needs, and the new leadership threatens to upend everything they've known. There are tense moments behind the scenes, with some officers privately expressing their dissatisfaction with the new direction. Some even attempt to push back against the new policies, using their position of power to undermine the leader's authority. It's clear that the old guard doesn't want to give up the status quo, and they begin to use subtle forms of sabotage to derail his efforts. The new leader, however, is undeterred. He understands that change will take time, and he is ready for the long, hard fight. He keeps a close eye on potential insubordination, using his position to ensure that those who wish to undermine his efforts are held accountable. He also spends a significant amount of time engaging with the community, regularly attending town hall meetings, speaking with residents, and making himself visible in neighborhoods that had previously been neglected or ignored. One of his first major tests comes when a series of complaints are filed against an officer for using excessive force during an arrest. The officer in question had been with the department for years and had been known for his aggressive tactics. The community is in an uproar, calling for immediate action. The pressure on the new leader intensifies as everyone expects him to deliver swift justice. Rather than back down or try to appease both sides, the new leader takes a strong stance. He opens a full investigation into the officer's conduct and ensures that the process is transparent. He also publicly addresses the incident, explaining that such behavior will not be tolerated under his leadership. The officer is placed on administrative leave while the investigation unfolds. While some officers rally behind the new leader's decision, others resent it. They view his swift action as a betrayal of the department's culture and a sign of weakness. The friction between the old and new ways of doing things grows, and the leader finds himself constantly walking a tightrope, trying to keep the department functioning while also holding his officers to higher standards. At the same time, the community begins to take notice of the changes. People who were once fearful of calling the police now start to feel more comfortable. There are more positive interactions between officers and residents, and the public begins to trust that complaints will be taken seriously. The new leader also establishes a civilian oversight board, giving the community a direct voice in how the department is run. However, the leader knows that this is just the beginning. He has to prove that his leadership is more than just a temporary shift. He begins working with other leaders in the criminal justice system to reform policies that have disproportionately affected minority communities. His agenda is clear, not just to change the police department, but to change the entire system that has allowed these injustices to persist. As the weeks go by, the department's image begins to improve, but the battle is far from over. The new leader faces resistance from both inside and outside the department. There are politicians who see his efforts as a threat to their own power, and there are members of the community who remain skeptical, uncertain whether the changes will truly be long-lasting. There are even rumors of sabotage from high-ranking members within the department, but the new leader remains steadfast in his mission. Through it all, the black leader holds on to his core values. He knows that this is a fight for justice, and he refuses to let the department slide back into the darkness. He continues to lead with integrity, knowing that the future of the department and the community depend on the decisions he makes today. Though the road ahead is fraught with challenges, the black man has become a symbol of hope for many, showing that even in the face of deep-seated corruption, change is possible. His leadership represents not just a personal victory, but a chance for the entire community to heal and rebuild. While the two corrupt officers may have rejoiced at their power in the past, the new leader has proven that true power lies in doing what is right, no matter the cost. As the new leader continues to implement reforms and hold officers accountable, word of the department's transformation begins to spread. The media, always hungry for a compelling story, catches wind of the changes and begins to cover the story extensively. Local news outlets, social media, and national platforms start to follow the developments, framing the story as one of redemption and hope for a department long mired in scandal. At first, the coverage is positive. The media highlights the black leader's efforts to root out corruption, reform the department, and rebuild trust with the community. They spotlight the transparency with which the new leader operates, the improvements in community relations, and the introduction of training programs on racial bias and de-escalation tactics. His approach is hailed as groundbreaking, and many see it as a template for other law enforcement agencies struggling with similar issues. However, as the media coverage intensifies, so does the scrutiny. Critics begin to emerge, questioning whether the leader's reforms are enough or whether they are just surface-level changes meant to placate the public. Some pundits argue that the department's problems run deeper than a few bad apples, and that a complete overhaul of the system is necessary. Others push for even stricter reforms, calling for more drastic changes to police culture and how the department interacts with marginalized communities. At the same time, the old guard within the department grows increasingly uneasy with the public attention. Some officers begin to feel as though their actions are being unfairly vilified, and they worry that the media's portrayal of the department's transformation is overly simplistic. The black leader becomes the face of these reforms, but not all officers within the department are happy with the changes. Tensions rise behind the scenes, as some officers start to view the media coverage as a reflection of their failure to live up to the new standards. The media also starts to dig deeper into the department's history, bringing up past incidents of police brutality, corruption, and racial profiling. The black leader's efforts are now being examined through the lens of systemic change. Journalists ask difficult questions about the long-standing issues within the department and whether the current reforms can truly undo years of damage. As the media's spotlight grows, so does the internal opposition within the department. At first, the new leader's vision for reform was met with tentative support, but now some officers are beginning to push back against the changes. These officers feel threatened by the new leadership, believing that their authority and established ways of doing things are being undermined. They start to grow increasingly vocal in their opposition, rallying together in private meetings to discuss how they can push back against the reforms. A few of the more outspoken officers begin to spread rumors about the new leader's methods. They claim that the reforms are impractical, that they're making the department less effective, and that the black leader is prioritizing community relations over law enforcement. Some even accuse him of being too lenient, too concerned with optics, and not tough enough on crime. Behind closed doors, there are whispers about the old guard attempting to reclaim control of the department. They try to recruit others who feel disillusioned by the changes, promising a return to the old ways of policing. Some officers, particularly those who have been in the department for decades, express concern that the reforms are weakening their ability to do their jobs effectively. They feel that the new leadership's focus on de-escalation and community engagement is hampering their authority and putting their safety at risk. The new leader is aware of the growing resistance and knows that it's only a matter of time before it reaches a boiling point. He tries to address the discontent head-on, calling meetings with the officers who are most vocal in their criticism. In these meetings, he listens to their concerns, attempts to clarify the intentions behind his policies, and reiterates that his goal is not to dismantle the department but to make it more transparent, accountable, and just. Still, the rift between the new leadership and some of the officers widens. The black leader knows that this is a critical moment. If he doesn't manage the situation carefully, the department could splinter, and the reforms could be at risk of failing. But at the same time, he remains firm in his belief that the changes he's implementing are necessary for the future of the department. He cannot and will not compromise on the principles of accountability and transparency. To combat the resistance, the new leader begins to bring in outside experts, bringing in community leaders, legal professionals, and even former officers who have experienced police reform firsthand. These experts speak directly with the officers, providing a broader perspective on why these reforms are important and how they can ultimately make the department more effective in the long term. He encourages the officers to embrace these new strategies, showing them how they can still perform their jobs effectively while respecting the rights of the people they serve. Despite his efforts, the resistance continues to simmer. There are still officers who actively undermine the changes by avoiding new protocols, refusing to implement the new training, and even passing over community engagement efforts in favor of traditional methods of policing. Some of them begin to operate in a more passive-aggressive manner, taking small actions that signal their dissatisfaction with the new leadership, whether it's through non-compliance with policies, a lack of cooperation during meetings, or even gossiping about the leader's decisions behind his back. This internal divide is compounded by the growing media attention, with some reports focusing on the alleged tensions between the new leader and the department's veteran officers. It becomes a contentious story. The media now covers not just the leader's reforms, but also the internal strife that has emerged within the department. Critics claim that the leader's attempts at reform have divided the department, and that some officers are simply unwilling to change. The new leader, however, remains resolute. He knows that change is never easy, especially in an institution as deeply rooted as law enforcement. He understands that resistance is natural, but he also understands that there can be no turning back. His vision for a fairer, more accountable police force will require tough decisions, and he's prepared to make them. He begins to implement new strategies to further break down the resistance. He introduces team-building exercises that bring together officers from different units to foster better communication and understanding. He also invites the public to witness firsthand the efforts his department is making to improve, holding town halls and transparency meetings where citizens can directly address concerns and ask questions. Gradually, some of the more skeptical officers begin to see the benefits of the changes. They witness firsthand the positive impact on the community as public trust in the department slowly starts to rebuild. They start to see the value of the reforms in action: fewer complaints of police brutality, improved relations with marginalized groups, and a more professional and accountable department. While not every officer is on board, there is a noticeable shift in sentiment among a significant portion of the department. However, the resistance isn't going away entirely. There are still officers who refuse to bend, and the black leader knows that his work is far from finished. He's fighting for the future of the department, and that battle will require not just policies, but a fundamental change in the culture of law enforcement, a change that will take time, patience, and unwavering commitment to the values he's instilling in the department. He's determined to see it through, no matter how difficult the journey becomes. As the tension within the department continues to mount, the new leader faces his ultimate test. After weeks of resistance and mixed reactions, a highly publicized court case emerges, one that could make or break the future of his reforms. The case involves a group of officers who have been accused of misconduct, and the public is watching closely to see how the department will respond. This case, coupled with the ongoing unrest within the force, creates a volatile atmosphere. The new leader knows that how he handles this case will be a critical moment not only for the department but for the entire community. It's a chance to prove that he's serious about transparency, accountability, and justice, values that he has fought so hard to instill. He prepares for the courtroom battle, knowing that his approach will be scrutinized by the media, by his officers, and by the very community he's trying to rebuild trust with. As the trial begins, the atmosphere in the courtroom is tense. The public, already divided on the issue of police reform, eagerly watches the proceedings. Some see this case as a test of the department's new leadership, while others view it as a chance for the old guard to make their final stand. The officers accused of misconduct are part of the faction within the department that has resisted the reforms. They represent everything the new leader is trying to change: corruption, disregard for the law, and a lack of accountability. In the courtroom, the new leader is present, but it's clear that he is not just an observer. He is directly involved in the process, working alongside the prosecutor's office to ensure that justice is served. He's personally invested in the case, knowing that the outcome will reflect his leadership, the integrity of his reforms, and the credibility of the department as a whole. The accused officer's defense is a mix of denial, counterclaims, and an attempt to discredit the leadership. They argue that the new leader's reforms are misguided, and that the public and the courts are being misled by biased narratives of police brutality and misconduct. Their defense paints a picture of an embattled department, one that has been unfairly targeted by outside forces, and a new leader who's out of touch with the realities of law enforcement. The new leader listens carefully, knowing that this courtroom battle is not just about the fate of the officers on trial, but about the future of the police force he's worked so hard to reshape. His legal team is well prepared, and they counter the defense's claims with irrefutable evidence, testimony from key witnesses, and the results of ongoing investigations into the officers' conduct. As the trial progresses, the court is presented with shocking revelations about the officers' actions, including a series of violent incidents that have been swept under the rug for years. The community, once again, begins to question the integrity of the department and the justice system. The media begins to cover the trial in greater detail, and public support for the new leader grows as it becomes clear that he is committed to transparency and rooting out corruption. When it comes time for the verdict, the tension is palpable. The courtroom is filled with a mixture of hope, fear, and uncertainty. The new leader, standing beside his legal team, watches as the judge reads the decision. The room goes silent as the verdict is announced, guilty. The officers who have resisted the changes, whose actions have tainted the department's reputation, are held accountable for their misconduct. The public reacts with a mix of emotions. Some celebrate the decision as a victory for justice and accountability, while others, particularly those who have been supportive of the old guard, express anger and frustration. The new leader, though, remains calm and composed. This is a victory for the reform he's fought for, an affirmation that the changes he has implemented are not just words but actions that lead to real consequences. In the aftermath of the trial, the new leader addresses the department and the community. He speaks of the importance of accountability and how this trial is just one step in a much larger process of change. He acknowledges the pain and distrust that exists in the community, but he also emphasizes that these reforms are necessary for the long-term health of the department and the safety of all citizens. This courtroom victory becomes a defining moment in his leadership. It sends a powerful message that no one is above the law, no matter their position or tenure. It is also a signal to the officers who resisted the reforms that the new leadership will not back down and that the culture of corruption and impunity will no longer be tolerated. For the new leader, this courtroom victory is both a triumph and a challenge. While he has successfully taken on the corruption within the department, the real work is far from over. The department is still divided, and there are many more battles to be fought, both inside the force and within the community. But for now, he has proven that justice and accountability can prevail, even in the face of fierce resistance. This case becomes a pivotal moment in the department's history, serving as a powerful reminder that the pursuit of justice requires courage, determination, and an unwavering commitment to doing what is right, even when it's difficult, unpopular, or uncomfortable. The new leader knows that the road ahead will be long and challenging, but for the first time in a long while, he feels confident that the department is heading in the right direction. While the public praises the new leader's bold actions in holding corrupt officers accountable, the reality of the situation is far more complex. The department is still grappling with the fallout from the trial. Tensions are high, and there is a sense of uncertainty among many officers, particularly those who are loyal to the old guard. For some, the conviction of their colleagues marks the beginning of a new chapter, but for others, it's a painful reminder that the status quo is no longer acceptable. The new leader knows that this victory is just the beginning of a much larger and more difficult journey. The corruption that existed within the department has not been eradicated overnight. While the trial sent a clear message, there are still many officers who are resistant to change, and the culture of secrecy and misconduct will take time to dismantle. There are also the deep-rooted issues within the community to address, issues that go beyond just the actions of individual officers. For years, the department has been mistrusted, and it will take more than just a courtroom victory to heal those wounds. To begin the process of rebuilding, the new leader starts by holding a series of internal meetings with the department's officers. He is transparent about the challenges ahead, acknowledging that trust must be rebuilt from the ground up. He calls for open dialogue, asking officers to speak honestly about their concerns, fears, and aspirations for the future. It's a difficult conversation, one that involves confronting uncomfortable truths about the past and about the department's culture. But the new leader is determined to make it happen. He emphasizes that the department's success moving forward will depend on the active participation of everyone, and that no one can be left behind in the transition. The meetings are tense, with some officers voicing their anger at the recent changes, while others express cautious optimism. Some of the more entrenched members of the old guard remain defiant, still believing that the new leadership's reforms are misguided and will ultimately fail. But for every dissenting voice, there are others who are ready to embrace the change. These officers are eager to work toward a department that prioritizes transparency, accountability, and the safety of all citizens, regardless of their race, background, or status. The new leader recognizes that the journey to restore the department's credibility will be long and challenging. He introduces new training programs designed to address issues like bias, de-escalation tactics, and community policing. These programs are mandatory for all officers, and he personally oversees their implementation. He also takes steps to create a more inclusive and transparent department, ensuring that all officers have access to resources and support systems that will help them succeed in the reform environment.